Hi, this is Neil Pasricha. I'm the author of The Book of Awesome and the host of the 3 Books podcast, and I am ready to start digging deep.
I'm Mark Sutcliffe, and I'm on a quest to learn from the best. Welcome to Digging Deep, presented by Zen Books and Abacus Data. This is the latest in our series of one-on-one conversations with thoughtful, accomplished people in many different fields who share their life lessons with us. Our guest today is Neil Pasricha. Neil Pasricha is the New York Times best-selling author of 7 books, including The Book of Awesome, The Happiness Equation, and his latest, which is titled You Are Awesome. Neil writes about many things, about living with intention, about failure, about resilience, happiness, trust, and gratitude. He is an entrepreneur, and he's the founder of the Institute for Global Happiness. Neil is also the host of the 3 Books podcast. In our conversation, we cover a wide range of topics. I think you're going to learn a lot from this. Neil shares the incredible and inspiring story of why he started blogging about awesome things at a very difficult time in his life, and how that completely transformed his outlook and set him on his current path. We talk about success and failure. We talk about the shortness of life and what we should learn from acknowledging how short it is. We talk about everything from parenting to leadership, and Neil's perspective is so very insightful and thought-provoking. Now, one last thing before we get started. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast and post a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and share this with your network. And if you're looking for more information on this episode or about the podcast in general, please go to letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. Now, let's start digging deep with Neil Pasricha. Well, Neil, it's such a delight to welcome you to Digging Deep. I am a big fan of your work, and you do so much good in the world with the message you spread, and you share so many lessons that I think are really powerful in changing people's lives. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And before we dive into some of those great lessons, let's get to know you a little bit more. And you've shared quite a lot about your own family background. If you go back to your childhood, what would you say is your fondest childhood memory?
I grew up in Oshawa, Ontario, so like an hour east of Toronto. My dad, an elementary school teacher, my mom, a chartered accountant, and we always had 1 week off every summer to rent a cottage up in the Muskoka. It was a little tiny cottage thing called Duff's Cottages. So my fondest childhood memories were just being up there, getting to explore. My sister and I would build sandcastles that we kept toads and frogs in, learning how to swim, running around. It was just a lot of fun.
Right on. Sounds great. What did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
A cartoonist.
Really?
Yeah, I used to trace like Garfield, cartoons. I think when I was a kid, cartoon strips, purchased from the 5 Points Mall at the Kohl's bookstore were one of the very few ways I could sense the true absurdity of life itself, because Garfield or Foxtrot or Ziggy or these, looking back, I don't even know if they were good comic strips, but I read them and I was like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. And I would trace the comics, and I liked that they showed me a side of life that was harder to access then than it is now.
So did you go to the newspaper and read like the comic strips in the newspaper?
Yeah, of course. And like the best part was Saturday, on the Saturday Star, there was like a giant pull-out section, just comic strips, and at the time, as I got older, things like Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side and Dilbert, like they got to sort of hit their heyday, and so I was really mesmerized by those. Again, it was just a way to access worlds. There's no internet, and so for a child, it was one of the few places where you get a perspective on life that is sometimes acerbic, sometimes it's sarcastic, sometimes it's, Dave Barry, the famous humorist, always said that there's only 2 ways to ever deal with the sort of giant abyss that is life itself. Like the idea that we don't know what we are, we don't know where we are, we don't know what we're doing here, we don't know what, there's just like a giant gnawing dread at the root sort of origin of our sense of consciousness. And he's like, the only two ways to deal with that are religion or laughter. Funny, make fun of it, make, sort of poke at it. And comic strips for me gave me that perspective for the first time.
Very cool. That seems like such a throwback thing, but I remember doing that too, going to the Saturday paper and pulling out that comics section.
Yeah, and the ones I mentioned were all like kind of fine, but also Far Side was like really kind of like, it pointed out sort of like flaws in how people think. Same with also didn't even mention, but like Mad Magazine was kind of in the same vein, like really it was comics, but the whole point was to sort of mock life itself. Nothing could be taken that seriously in the pages, and I always appreciated that view. Somehow that enabled the perspective many years later of awe. Like if you don't take it too seriously, then you can just sit back and appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. What's your life story in 6 words?
Born, right place, right time, I'd say. Born, right place, and right time. That's 6 words. I just got lucky. I mean, look, if I was born even 500 years ago, I wouldn't even be able to see past the age of 5. I got glasses when I was too young. I would have been like, left to the dustbin. I wouldn't have even made it. I would have just been walking around blind, like if they didn't have glasses. And if I was born in any sort of agrarian society or like, farming society, it's like I got no muscles. I'm scrawny. I'm skinny. I would be like a loser in any of these societies. So I just so happened that I got born in like a day and age where like, knowledge is power, and I got born in a country, Canada, which was, safe and beautiful and lucky. And my parents both born, my mom born in Nairobi, Kenya, my dad born in Amritsar, India. Neither of them had the same upbringing. Even just things like vaccination and fresh water in the taps and being able to buy protein and meats at the grocery store. Like, my parents didn't have that stuff. My dad bought an egg once a month. Like, he shared a bedroom with all of his siblings, five siblings. And to get born in Oshawa in 1979 and to grow up where I could get glasses and my brains were appreciated and I could focus on nurturing them because I didn't have to go like, plant wheat, was just totally fortuitous. And I just feel very, very, very lucky. Right place, right time is kind of, I guess, just a huge...
Yeah.
Huge lucky. Even today, if I was born in most of the rest of the world, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing.
Yeah. I totally share that perspective. I had my appendix out at one point, which means, it's similar to you. I always think if I'd been born 200 years earlier, that would have been it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my dad got a quadruple bypass at age 68, and that would have totally killed. I mean, like. We just get we take it, even just now, I don't know when this podcast is being released, but just the idea that there's a vaccine for like a global pandemic virus that we just heard about like a year ago. And it's like, now we know how to get this thing. Like, how did we can't even see it. The thing is invisible. It's mutating like crazy. It's killing people left, right, and center. And like within a year, we're like, yeah, we got this covered. Like that's...
Yeah, I always say, even with everything that's happened in the past year, I still think there's never been a better time to be alive than today.
No, exactly. I totally agree with that. It's, there's more threats too, or at least there's the magnification of the perception of threats. Yet, if you read any of Steven Pinker's books, like Enlightenment Now, we've never been safer. We've never had more access to medicine. We've never had more access to clean water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I do think that humans are smart enough as a collective, even if we're not as individuals, to recognize things that ail us and to swerve away from them. So, for example, right now, cell phones, social media, news media, these things are starting to spiral into really sort of nasty places, but we're aware of them. And I think we're starting to steer ourselves. I like the fact that Mark Zuckerberg's on trial, like, cause like a few years ago, it was like everyone wanted to just be Mark Zuckerberg, but now I'm like, yeah, no, we got to prosecute that guy. Like, we got to put Facebook in jail. Like, let's recognize that that's a problem now. I like that we've gotten pretty quick at figuring out what's bad for us, and then we got to get rid of it as a system. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this next question I know is a big part of your story, and we're gonna explore that a little more in a few minutes. But I think I know the answer to it, but I'll ask it anyway. What was the toughest year of your life so far, and why?
Yeah, I mean, on a whole, I've been just so massively lucky. But about 10 years ago, I my wife left me. Um, I don't talk about it much, but she really left me for another person who was also kind of leaving their relationship at the same time. And then, of course, I had to sell my house, and my best friend took his own life at the same time, like right around the same time. So I lost my closest kind of friend and confidant to suicide. So that all happened really close together in the span of a few really days. And uh, looking back, uh, it's I wouldn't have been able to. I wouldn't have written 1000awesomethings.com, which turned into the Book of Awesome, if it wasn't for those things happening. But at the time, I mean, I wouldn't have traded. I wouldn't wish those experiences on anyone.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that coming up. What one person would you say has had the greatest impact on your life?
When I worked at Walmart, we had a new incoming CEO from England named Dave Cheesewright, and we had this long rambling meeting every Friday morning that was like 2.5 hours long. And in his first meeting, he stood up and he's like, "Hi, I don't like how long this meeting is. Does anyone have anything burningly urgent that they wish to say?" And like no one had the guts to say anything. He's like, "Meeting's adjourned. Get back to work." And I was like, "Oh, I really like this guy." So I clamored internally to work for him directly and essentially created a position called project manager to the CEO. And for 4 years, I got to work for this guy who ended up becoming the CEO of Walmart International. So he became a mentor. He's still a mentor today. And he informed a lot of my ideas in my TED Talks and also in the happiness equation. A lot of the stories in the happiness equation are actually stories about him, but I've changed his name and blurred the details to keep his confidentiality because at the time he was actually the CEO of Walmart International. So I didn't want to be like, well, the CEO of Walmart International does this with his email. The CEO of Walmart International, I just like kind of hid the messages, but really it was his view of the world and his ability to synthesize so many human behaviors into simple models that I've really fallen in love with and I try to do in my own work today.
Very cool. What would you say is the biggest factor that led you to where you are today?
Uh, I am a selfish workaholic. Selfish in the sense that um like I really value my time. I'm massively informed by a small essay called On the Shortness of Life, written by Seneca about 2,000 years ago, which points out that we are, we fight to the death over infringements on things like our property or our resources or money or our state, but then we let people have our time all the time, willy nilly. Meanwhile, time is the most precious resource of all. We only have 30,000 days. That's in Canada. It's 25,000 globally as of the average. And you're only awake for half of it. So it's like, man, like if we only have like 12 and a half to 15,000 days, that's it. Then I got to be really, really, really selfish with what I do with them. And so I'm massively selfish about my time. And I'm a workaholic. So I don't say that to in a positive way. In fact, I've tried to work that out of my system, and I think I've worked that out of my system mostly, but I'm 41 as I talk to you, and I know that I was definitely a workaholic from like my mid-20s to my mid-30s. So therefore, if you work all day and then you work all night and you're protective of your time, you can actually accomplish a lot. So that's what happened, really, I think. I mean, look, I was working full-time at Walmart, right? I was working full-time at Walmart as the assistant to the CEO. So like a 24/7 type of job. And I was coming home every night writing 1000awesomethings.com. So that's a daily blog that I wrote for 1,000 straight days. And I wrote and published 5 books. Book of Awesome, All Its Sequels, Happiness Equations, children's book. And I gave 200 talks. And once the TED Talk came out, I was invited to speak ever. I did that all at the same time, over all the same years. All like while doing I didn't quit the day job. So I was doing all of that at once. So what got chopped was everything else: physical health, nutrition, social connection, large groups of friends, dating life. Like I neutered off of myself tons of stuff that you should never neuter off. However, in exchange, I was able to channel massive amounts of pure sort of jewels of energy into work, which helped the work get noticed and blossom and inflamed it with direction. And now that I'm hopefully a little bit more chilled out, I am remarried today, and we have 4 young boys under the age of 6. I have been forced to slow down, and today I think I am still very selfish when it comes to my time. So you'll hear me on this podcast, but none others this year. Like, I'm not doing any other podcasts, for example. And I'm really choosy about things like speaking. I've made my speaking fee ridiculously high so that I don't do that many of, you know what I mean? And stuff like that. I've tried to control so that I can spend a lot of time with my family and calling my parents and being really tight with my friends and going for walks in nature and doing the things that I know that I preach do actually give you a good, rich life.
Right on. What's the most fun that you've ever had?
I mean, if I'm really living the answer to that question well, then the answer is always kind of like whatever I'm doing, like right now. Like, so right before this, I was on a conversation with, Imagination Library about doing something together with Dolly Parton, maybe for my podcast, 3 books, or maybe at her Imagination Library conference. She donates more books than anybody in the world, period, full stop. Dolly Parton does. I don't know if you knew. Not many people know that, but Dolly Parton donates 1.5 million books a year. And she doesn't raise money for it. It's like coming from the Dolly Parton like piggy bank, you know? And I did that right before, and I was loving that conversation. And then when I'm done this conversation, I'm going to like go upstairs to my basement, like play with my little kids and make dinner. And I'm going to love that. And then after my kids are in bed, I'll probably come down to the basement and like, I'm working on a big book project right now, and I've got cue cards all over my basement walls, and I'm mapping all that out, and it kind of makes no sense to anybody except myself, and I'll be really into that. And so what's the most fun I've ever had? Well, it's kind of like what I'm doing now. And so the risk of thinking that way, of course, is that you fail to sort of plan or strategize or kind of lead your life in a different direction. And to do that, what I do is like at least once a week, I go on like long, aimless 5-hour-long walks to make sure that I'm not just doing things right, but I'm also doing the right things. So I am pretty planful at a high level about what I'm doing. And then once I know that that's done, I just like to sink into the task at hand or the moment at hand.
There's some great lessons in there, but what I'm going to take away from that and tell everybody I know is that you said doing this podcast is the most fun you've ever had.
Yes, exactly. And I said it's the only podcast I'm doing this year, and I'm serious. Like I'm saying no to every podcast request I get every day. And the reason I'm doing that is because if I don't do that, then it will eat time away from the art that I'm making or the time I'm spending with my family.
Yeah.
Right. So I have to do that. It's hard to say no. The thing is, you know, the people always talk about good to great, but there's a phrase baked into that old famous book by Jim Collins that's like good is the enemy of great. And I love that phrase because what it means is that actually, if you take it a notch higher, great is the enemy of life changing. And since life is so short and so finite, you really only have time to, if you're able to spend time on things that are ultimately life-changing to you. Work that is soul-fulfilling, family that is deeply connecting, relationships that are, you can tell, you know how good your relationships are if you know how much of yourself you share into those relationships. Like, how honest are you with your closest friends? How honest are you with your parents? How much do you reveal of your heart, of your minds, of your idiosyncrasies, of the thoughts that you're not sure you should have and the dangerous thoughts you have and all that stuff? That amount of sharing and revealing and connecting actually enables deeper connections in your life, and you can't get there if you're just doing great work. So you have to even ixnay the great stuff in order to do the life-changing stuff, which is really, really hard to do. But that's why I said that selfishness, or at least selfishness around time, is actually one of the best kind of qualities somebody could have.
I love that message, and I'm going to depart from my usual format of just jumping to the next question to kind of drill down on that a little bit, because I've been thinking so much about that lately that there was a time, and I know I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to say this, but there was a time when I was able to choose what projects I worked on based on what I enjoyed, and I realize now even that isn't good enough, right? Like I've got to have a higher threshold than that.
Yeah.
Because time is of the essence, and I enjoy doing a lot of different things. So it's kind of like, if I wanted to read all the books that I would enjoy reading, I'd run out of time. So I've got to have a higher threshold for the books I read, and I've got to have a higher threshold for how I invest my time in things, what work projects I do. And that means I'm going to say no to some things that I would really enjoy
Yeah.
because I've got to, it's like taking a 5-hour movie and trimming it down to 2 hours. You've got to leave a lot of good stuff on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful way to think about it. If I could insert a little mental model to help people think about that, because you can project that line of thinking onto career, you can project it onto relationship, you can project that onto art. But the way I would say it is ask yourself two questions at all times. Number one, and this is hard to answer, both questions are hard to answer. Actually, the first question is hard to answer, the second one is easy. First question is, what is the thing I do that no one else does or can do that absolutely delights or helps people at a level that other people can't? Like, so if it's a business thing, you're like, that delights customers. Like, what's essentially it's a competitive advantage. But if it's just you personally, it's like, what do I do that actually lights me up and lights other people up that no one else can really do? Or like, what's my special meanness thing? And then the second question is, does this thing that you're considering doing, project, task, assignment, blah, 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 does it help me do that? So again, the two questions are, what is the thing I do that no one else does that delights people, that's really making a difference? And number two, does the opportunity I'm being presented with help me achieve it?
Yeah, whatever's in front of you right now, the next task you're going to do or something someone's given to you as an opportunity, does that bring you closer to doing more of that special thing, basically?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Because I think too often people and organizations are easily distracted. And then you end up doing... Look, I'll give you an example. I joined a board of a public company like a year ago and in Canada. And it took time, and that's fine. But it wasn't helping me do my special thing, which is I think, write, and speak about intentional living. That's what I do. And I call it an ikigai. That's the phrase I used in the book, The Happiness Equation, which is a course borrowed from Okinawa, where they have it translates roughly as the reason you get out of bed in the morning. And I realized it wasn't helping me. And so you're only supposed to be on a board if you can stay on it for 3 years. And I was like, I kind of got to leave this board. I'm so sorry. I just realized this doesn't totally work for me. It takes a lot of time, and it doesn't, help me do my bigger thing. And so those conversations are hard to have, but they're really important. And if sometimes people say to me, "Oh, well, you have no employees. How do you do, the books and the podcast and the blah 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 blah?" And I was like, "Well, it's because of saying no to lots of stuff."
Yeah, great point. All right, what's the scariest thing you've ever done?
I'm 41 now. I didn't start drinking till I was like alcohol. Until I was like 22 or something. Like I went to Queens, which is pretty well known as like a drinking oriented culture in some sense. But I didn't drink. I didn't even drink at all until like my very last kind of few weeks of school or something. And so as a result, I got exposure to alcohol at a later age. And you know how like the male brain doesn't like fully mature till like it's like in its mid to late 20s? Well, scariest thing I've ever done was like, I remember for my 25th birthday, we rented out like a bar in downtown Toronto, Clinton's. And we hired a sketch comedy troupe that was run by one of my friends. And it was awesome. Everyone got to the bar, but then suddenly we all had to sit down for like 2 hours to watch a sketch comedy troupe. And then by the time that was done, it was like everyone had to go home. So everyone was like, bought me a birthday drink. And I drank like 16 gin and tonics in like 10 minutes. And then we were driving home on the highway because I lived out in Whitby and I had to throw up. So my friend pulls over on the inner lane of the highway. And I remember like standing on the 401, throwing up on the 401 with like trucks going by honking. And I was like, this is really stupid. It's very scary. And I look back on that now and I'm like, what was I could have just died. Like that was so dumb. And I talk to people about that. I actually, because that experience really haunts me. It's like, wow, I can't believe I just sort of risked my life like that. And it turns out that most people have experiences like that, especially in adolescence or late adolescence. My wife Leslie will remark on, driving a boat late at night in pitch black when she shouldn't have been, or whatever it is. And I mentioned that to you because I'm a parent now of little boys, and I worry like, well, how do you keep them safe when we know the brain doesn't totally mature, the prefrontal cortex isn't totally there till like you're in your kind of somewhere between your late teens and your late 20s, and yet you're old enough as an adult, like legally in this country, to kind of do anything you want. And I think those years are pretty scary and precarious. And at the same time, I want to inject those years as sort of like a, if I'm a motivational speaker and people are like ask me what to do with their 20s, I'm like, it's the decade of experimentation. Like, you have 2 decades of education before you got 7 decades after to like do stuff. At 20s, like go to different countries, sleep with different people, learn different languages, try new jobs. Like I'm actually espousing this idea of using your 20s as an experimental decade because it's a massive investment in kind of who you are and who you could be in your life. At the same time, I'm like kind of freaked out by some of the decisions I made that were relatively scary in retrospect in terms of like risking my life for no reason. And I'm like, as a parent, I'm like, eh. So anyway, this is just like a little thing I'm thinking about right now.
Wow. All right, a couple more of these quick questions, and then we'll get into a deeper conversation. But so much of this is a preface to all of that. What would be the message of your commencement address if you were speaking to a group of students right now? Give us a capsule version of that.
Well, the good news for you is I actually have a chapter in You Are Awesome, my most recent book, on what I would do if I was giving a commencement speech. So I say that most commencement speeches are do what you love, right? It's all like follow your heart. That's the typical message. But what I would say in my commencement speech is actually a question. Do you love it so much you can take the pain and the punishment too? And the point of that is that, the founding editor of The Onion, a guy named Todd Hanson, which is the foremost comedy newspaper in the United States, was asked, how do you get paid to write jokes? And he said, you do it for free for 10 years. And Mark Manson, who's the number one selling self-help author in the United States, he wrote the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It sold 10 million copies. He was asked, well, why do you do that? And he's like, well, because I love the torture and the pain of like learning how to write and like getting into Facebook comment wars with people, blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to be a rock star, but I could not take the idea of lugging an amp to like a smoking nightclub every Tuesday morning at 2 a.m. And practicing the same chord progression for 6 straight hours. I saw the work involved in being a rock star was not interesting enough work for me, and the pain oriented. Everything is achievable if you could take the pain, and most people can't take the pain of anything, and so you have to like the pain. You have to like the process to achieving the thing you want. Don't just want to be a doctor. You got to love however many years you're in med school for. Don't just want to be a writer. You got to love the torturous process of writing stuff that no one reads and posting things on blogs that no one comments on and like sending letters that no one responds to because you like writing it. And so the torture, the pain, the journey, that's a big part of your question. And you got to ask yourself that more than what you want to do is what you want to feel all the way through it.
Great message. And I remember talking to Malcolm Gladwell about running one time because he was a really fast runner.
He's a big runner.
Yeah, in his teenage years, and was an Ontario champion at the 1500 meters. And he talked about how he realized at a certain point that he was going to be a really good runner, but not a superstar runner because the other guys liked the training more than he did. And they were willing to do it more than he was. He didn't, he liked running fast. He liked racing, but he didn't like the training as much as they did. And there were guys who would just go out and run until they puked. And he wasn't one of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's great. No, I love that you said that. And presumably, people don't really realize with him that, he wrote The Tipping Point and Blink and Outliers. But yeah, this guy was like slaving away as a journalist at the Washington Post for all these years, right? Like, so that was a torturous process and he always says he learned to write fast there, right? There's a bunch of stuff he learned there that became really important later because presumably he liked the process, the pain in the process.
What's been a recent epiphany for you? Is there something about which you've changed your mind, or is there a recent discovery?
I'm still in the process of this epiphany, but I think I'm a good dad, and I have thought I was a bad dad for a long time. I mean, I freak out on my kids. I yell at my kids. I'm not patient enough. I say the wrong thing. I coach their behavior in the incorrect way. I read parenting books, and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, and I try this thing out. So, like, I'm always struggling with how I am as a father, and I just have more recently come to the epiphany that if I do indeed care so much about it, which I do, then that itself is probably driving some sense of, hopefully that's channeling some love and some care and some ability in that area. So my opinion of myself as a dad is starting to finally grow after a 4th child has appeared. And I'm like, I gotta I gotta be less hard on myself about how, because parenting, of course, is like the grayest of all sciences and the roughest of all things, and it constantly helps you battle with yourself, and so I just never get to feel like I do when a book is on the bestseller list or a million people download a show. Like there's certain metrics associated with almost everything in life that you can be like, oh, I did that, or there's research that defines it. Whereas parenting or being a dad, I'm just like, man, this is just like a forever long slog. And I'm starting to feel less bad about myself on how I'm doing and a little bit more positive around that.
Parenting is the infinite game, and there's no scoreboard,
Yes.
and yeah, I relate to everything you just said. But I also, I think that point you make is really powerful, and not to, we're all trying to get better as parents, and I make a lot of mistakes. Many of the ones you just
How old are
described. My kids are 11 and 9.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
But I think as long as there's that foundation of love and support and caring, and there's a genuine connection between you and your kids, you can make a lot of mistakes. And that's not to excuse them or forgive them or anything like that, because you want to avoid them as much as you can. But if that's all, in the context of love and support for your kids, and they know that, then I think overall you're going in the right direction. And you can forgive some of them momentary lapses, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, I'm in therapy. I go to a therapist. I have for 10 years. I think it's great. I espouse it. I tell people to all the time. And my parents were awesome. I was loved. I was unconditionally loved. So I don't see they're like, oh, your kid's going to need a therapist for that. I'm like, that's great. I actually want kids to be working on themselves and their mental health and their at all times, no matter what I do. My therefore thought from that is that there's no such thing as getting through kind of life or childhood without experiencing some trauma. And in fact, that trauma probably builds resilience anyway. So therefore, in conclusion, no matter what you are, as long as you care about doing a good job, that's fine.
Your books have had a huge impact on other people, obviously. Is there a book that's had a huge impact on you that you recommend to others?
Yeah, the one I always recommend is On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. And the beautiful thing about recommending a book that's 2,000 years old is it's very much out of copyright. So anyone listening to this right now could literally Google the phrase On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. And what you'll end up finding is this book, really, it's a letter that was written 2,000 years ago. But I swear to God, it sounds like it was written yesterday, about what I mentioned earlier on the valuing of our time and how short life truly is, but it's long if you know how to live it. So that informs a lot of my just deepest beliefs that life is so short and you have to really be intentional about living it, because it's over in the blink of an eye.
Yeah. All right, Neil, thank you so much for answering those questions. In just a moment, we are going to start digging deeper, in fact, with Neil Pasricha. We're just going to take a quick break so I can tell you a little bit more about the presenting sponsor of Digging Deep, ZenBooks. ZenBooks is Canada's go-to cloud accounting firm. They are not your typical accounting firm. I know the founders, Colin and Eric. I've worked with them for several years. And here's why I think you should consider working with them too. First of all, they bring a fresh, unique, modern approach to what is a very old-fashioned industry. These guys were working remotely and in the cloud long before it became cool. ZenBooks also uses technology to your advantage. I think this is really important. They give you the tools and analysis you need to monitor your business in real time. That's so valuable right now when everything changes so quickly. Yes, they're a virtual accounting firm, but that doesn't mean they're offshore, and it doesn't mean they're inattentive. ZenBooks combines the efficiency and effectiveness of a cloud accounting service with all the benefits that you'd want from a trusted advisor, high-level advice, and strategic support. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if you work with ZenBooks. You'll probably start out taking advantage of their cutting-edge cloud accounting solutions, but in the long run, I think you'll stay with them because of their strategic guidance and problem solving. Among their core values, they specifically list being candid and proactive. Isn't that exactly what you want from a trusted advisor? Look, even if you're already working with an accountant or a bookkeeper, or you have some accounting staff on your team, I think you should still talk to ZenBooks and learn more about their tools and their expertise. Check out ZenBooks at zenbooks.ca. That's zenbooks.ca. Digging Deep is all about helping you make better decisions, and so is Abacus Data. Most leaders struggle to connect with and engage their audiences. Why is that? It's because they aren't sure how they think and feel and how they will react. Abacus Data can give you the strategic insights you need to make better decisions and to make them confidently. Here's a good example. A major national union was recently negotiating a new agreement for its thousands of members. This had the potential to be a very difficult process. There were many competing interests. So they brought in Abacus Data to conduct thorough and detailed research of their members to learn exactly where they stood, what they were thinking, what they wanted. And as a result, they were able to secure a strong new deal that was accepted overwhelmingly in a national vote. Abacus Data helps all of its clients understand what's really happening in the minds of their employees, clients, and stakeholders. They help them avoid costly blind spots. And they're really good at what they do. In fact, Abacus Data was one of the most accurate pollsters in the 2019 Canadian federal election. Make the one decision that will improve all of your other decisions. Let Abacus Data help you move forward with confidence and clarity. Go to abacusdata.ca. That's abacusdata.ca. Neil, once again, it's such a pleasure to chat with you, and there's so many themes that arose from even the early part of this discussion. We already went in many different directions, but I was hoping you could share a little bit more about how you started down this path, because I think it is a really powerful story of what happened to you going back, I think, 11 or 12 years now.
Yeah.
And your world changed, as you already alluded to, and then you made a big decision, and I think that's critical to this. And you've talked before about how important it is to make a decision to move forward. And you move forward in spite of the negative things that had just happened to you. You move forward with gratitude and awareness and observing all the cool things in the world. So can you just describe how you were able to make that decision? What was going on at that time?
Yeah, sure. So my wife told me she didn't want to be married to me anymore. We'd been married 2 years. We just bought a house. We're talking about having kids. My best friend Chris took his own life and was suddenly, strikingly just gone. I'm trying to write a eulogy for his funeral. I'm trying to sell a house. I'm trying to process a divorce paperwork. I'm looking for distraction, but of course, everything I look for to pacify and distract myself is negative. Our brains have an amygdala in them. That is it's almond-sized thing, and the oldest part of our brain that is oriented towards naturally looking for negativity. We have a natural negativity bias. I didn't know this at the time, but it's why you rubberneck on the highway. It's why if it bleeds, it leads. It's why you look for the high cholesterol when you get the blood test back. We have a natural negativity bias, which is why all news media and social media, for the most part, feeds us that, because it's what attracts our attention, which enables them to sell us more ads, to sell us more stuff. Therefore, whenever I opened the newspaper, or flipped open turn on the TV or turn on the radio, it's all negativity. So then I'm like, well, I got to find something. I'm not going to feel any better. I mean, I was in shock. I was in pain. I was like, this is like a long journey. I'm like losing weight. I'm not eating. I'm not sleeping. I was like, I need something positive. I knew that much was clear. I mean, there's nothing good anywhere. Right. So I just go to Google, I type in how to start a blog, and I start a website called 1000awesomethings.com. On that website, I start writing, because it's 1,000, and because I'm like a, Indian overachiever who did his homework as a child, I'm like, well, I got to write 1,000 now. And it's a countdown. I started with number 1,000. I didn't start with number 1. So the forced kind of prescriptive nature of this countdown forced me to, no matter how bad my day was, write something that made me smile that day. And my posts sucked, Mark. Like if you read the early posts of the blog, they sucked. Like number 1,000 was broccoli. I like the strange hybrid child of nature's ugliest vegetables. It was not funny. It was short. I didn't have anything to say. They had no comments. The end. You know what I mean? Like my posts sucked, but the process forced me to try to keep going. And to make a long story short, that culminated in 100 million people visiting this site that won the best blog in the world 2 years in a row and turned into a huge series of books, including the Book of Awesome, sold 1 million copies. Like that came from that blog. That was a nothing thing, but it just was a place where I tried to focus on the positive. And I got to admit also, I remember at the time I was like Maclean's magazine had just run a profile on a blog called Stuff White People Like. Stuff White People Like was a Canadian guy living in LA writing a blog about stuff white people like. Of course, the version of white people he was talking about were like, Trader Joe's people, like, like left liberal, like left wing kind of hipsters. And I was like, I went to the blog and I was like, oh, like it kind of gave me the idea like a little bit. Like I was like, I could do something like this and that would help me. But I don't want to be acerbic and negative. I want to make it positive because I need to be thinking about positive stuff. Because if I think about more negative stuff, I'm going to drown, So it was more like a reaching up for a rope ladder rather than any sort of broad strategic idea. It was more just like I needed a positive thing, so I made it.
So what do you think the lesson is in that? Because obviously you could not have imagined the response you were going to get. I've heard you joke about how initially it was just your mom reading it and then you doubled your audience when she got your dad to read it.
Yeah.
You could not have imagined a book deal coming out of that or this entire sort of direction in your life. Everything is sort of the fruits of that tree, right?
Yeah. I mean, the lessons are, make the thing you start so self-serving that if no extrinsic motivators ever show up and appear, you will keep doing it anyway, and it will have a soothing or a calming or a balming type of effect on you. And I say that as somebody who started a podcast a couple years ago called 3 Books. Well, 3 Books is a wonderful podcast, I think, but it's not like it's like Dax Shepard or Revisionist History or it's not like it's like one of the best podcasts in the world. And when I started it, I was like, well, that would have been nice. But I made sure that the root kernel running that podcast, which was me interviewing people about which 3 books most shaped their life, was interesting enough for me to continue to do the project. And that's important to know because, of course, first of all, that's going to make sure you do it. Second of all, that's actually going to help you more than anything else. And third of all, that love or real passion comes through. You said to me before you hit record today, like, I just love doing this. I'm so excited. I get to talk to people. Like, that's why the show was good, because of that. So not being too, I don't know, business oriented, but just being more like, what teases my heart the right way oriented that's one of the lessons in there for sure. And then if you have a left brain analytical sort of like achievement oriented mindset, then just design the system so that it forces you to do it. I mean, this is partly why things like Fitbit work for some people and not for others. But for me, making a thing called 1,000 Awesome Things and starting with number 1,000 meant that I would fail at my own little conceit if I stopped doing it. So I wanted to just do it so that I could do it. Right?
I think that's a great point, that designing things so that you're forced to keep going, right? That's exactly. I think about that sometimes of, just creating the circumstances that force you to keep going. Like if you want to be a writer, then you got to set a goal for yourself and write 250 words a day, and it doesn't matter what those words are. And then over time you'll get better. But you got to
put a big X put a big calendar on your wall and make an X in red on every day that you do it. So you see the chain growing. You don't want to let yourself down, and like that type of positive pressure is what I'm talking about.
Can you talk more about the 100-year horizon that you've spoken about before? Because I think that is really powerful, and I've actually been thinking a lot about it lately. That if everybody spent more time thinking about how 100 years from now they will be dead, everyone they love will be dead, and there will be very few things left of their legacy except for maybe 1 or 2 projects that they might work on or messages that they might deliver that could still be resonating at that time, that it would change how people, if we could only think about that every single day, it would change the way we act, it would change our priorities, it would change a lot of things, but it is very hard to stay focused on that.
Yeah, I look, no one knows what the universe even is. We don't even know what it is. No one knows what it even is. And We certainly have never seen any other form of conscious sentient life anywhere else in it. We think this is the only place there is. Everyone's like, it's got to be out there somewhere. Does it? We haven't found it anywhere. We've been looking. We looked at millions of places. We haven't seen life anywhere. So now it's like, okay, that's the only place you can live. How long are you alive for? Well, like I said at the beginning, if you're in Canada, you're listening to this, or if you're in a developed country, whatever, 30,000 days. That's it. You put that in hours, you got like a couple 100,000 hours. Like, it's like you don't have that much time. So you don't remember what life was like before you were born, and you won't remember what life was like after you're born. But there's a brief, tiny candle-like glimmer in the middle where you're like, bam, you're here. And it's kind of short, and it goes by really fast. It might feel long because you're living it, but in the grand scheme of everything, you're here for like nothing. You're here for nothing. You're here for no time. And so I think that should therefore inform your heart and your mind and your movements throughout life. It would be a shame to die with relationships that were untended to, or that were regrets that you still carried, or grudges that you never solved. Not saying it's easy, but I just mean, like, how can you move forward in your life to really cherish and value and nurture each day like it is a special thing, because it is a special thing. Does that mean I do it every day? Of course not. Does that mean I totally slip and miss it? Of course it does. But when I get to talk to people like you on podcasts like this, it is a helpful reminder. I've made my work all about this idea. Like, everything I do, from the talks, from the books, is oriented around this one idea that life is short and you will never be as young as you are right now, period, for everybody listening. And I just think that means hug your kids tighter, and, play the music louder, and say hi to your neighbors, and drop a meal off when your friend has a baby, and just be a good, connected person as best you can. And I do believe also that there is only one life, meaning that the life that you are living, and that I am living, and that trees are living, and that fish are living, and that, like, we are all come from the same place. Animals and plants and fungi only split off from each other 800 million years ago. So actually, before that, we were all just one thing, and even still today, I firmly believe that what we refer to in science as symbiosis, trees making oxygen and us making carbon dioxide for each other, is actually just a function of different organs of the same system separating from each other physically, but actually we're still the same thing. So I know, like everyone knows, that and you won't be here in 100 years, but even more important or precious or special than that is, like, you got this consciousness, this time, right now, period. And, live it, love it, nurture it. I don't mean you got to make stuff. I don't mean you got to make money. I don't mean you got to run a company. I don't mean you got to make something special. I just mean, like, make that hug longer, call your mom and tell her you love her. Do the things that you want to do. Hold yourself up to a level that you would be proud of when you look back on your life.
Great message. Now, there are going to be people who look at this, and I know you offer a lot of very practical advice. And so I want to get into that, because there are people who will respond to this and say, easy for you to say as a best-selling author and somebody who gets to love your job. I get to love my job. There are lots of people who don't have that luxury. They go to work every day and it's a grind. They're doing something they don't love. They don't have the option of quitting and painting or writing or going for long walks, that sort of thing. So how can you live an intentional life even if you have lots of obstacles in it?
There's so many things to do, and they apply to everybody. I mean, of course, I know I'm privileged, and that's true. But having said that, I'm only doing what I'm doing because I think what I'm thinking, not the other way around. I don't think what I'm thinking because I get to do what I'm doing. It's the opposite. The thing I'm doing is a function of my belief in this philosophy. But anyway, you're only awake 1,000 minutes a day. period. Every person. So right away, when I ask people what they do in the first 2 minutes that they wake up in the morning, everyone's like, oh, I check my cell phone. 95% of people sleep within 10 feet of their cell phone. And I check my cell phone. I see what Trump tweeted, or, well, not anymore. He's banned. But like, you just check the news. Like, you suddenly sink into the matrix right away. And the matrix is the term I used to describe every single news media, social media website. Again, they're all oriented to mine your attention, to feed you ads. MSNBC's goal is to sell you Subarus. Like, yeah, you're a mark. You're a hook. You are our bait. Instead, I say get rid of that phone. Recognize it as the addictive, dangerous device that it is. Plug it into the basement or the kitchen or leave it somewhere else. And instead, when you wake up in the morning, grab a pen and a piece of paper and write down 3 things I will let go of, I am grateful for, and I will focus on. I could bore you with all the details, but just trust me, every single one of these 3 phrases is completely grounded in research and science that shows if you can write down, I will let go of the mom guilt I am feeling with my kid home from school and me trying to do my job in a half-assed way on the computer. I am grateful for when my husband Antonio put the toilet seat down, when my 3-year-old daughter Sonia learned how to write the letter E. I will focus on finally doing that expense report that I was supposed to do 3 months ago. That simple practice, I will let go of, I am grateful for, I will focus on, actually is a way to center and ground your mindset and help you live a happier day. So that's just one thing. And then I'll give you the end of the day thing is reading. Reading 20 pages of fiction before you go to bed. And I know people have demanding jobs. I know they're working 3 jobs. And I know they're taking care of 7 kids and all this stuff up. But did you have 20 minutes at the end of the day just to read fiction? 2011 Annual Review of Psychology shows that reading fiction opens up the mirror neurons in your brain responsible for empathy, compassion, understanding. What I'm saying is the EQ that every company derails your career after, that's really the derailer of every career is EQ. Right? We think you have good results, but no one likes you. That's kind of, then you can build those by subverting your conscience and living as another gender, in another religion, in another time in the world, in another place of the world. George R.R. Martin wrote in Game of Thrones, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one." So I just gave you a 2-minute practice to start your day and a 20-minute practice just reading fiction at the end of the day. So if you could give me 22 minutes out of the 1,000 you have, no matter what your circumstance, then those 2 things will really help a lot. And those are just 2 of like 100 other things I could tell you if this podcast was 7 hours long.
Let's talk about resilience, which is a big part of your latest book. And by the way, I can't think of a more marketable title for a book than You Are Awesome.
The subtitle is what is really illuminating for that book, right? The subtitle is How to Navigate Change, Wrestle with Failure, and Live an Intentional Life. And those words, would make a too long book title, but they're really what the book's about.
Yeah. And there is so much negativity now, and it is, I think people do feel that life is harder today. We've talked already about how there's never been a better time to be alive, but it's also a very challenging time to be alive. There's so much opportunity. There's so many choices. I wouldn't necessarily want to trade places with a teenager right now or somebody who's just, starting university or something like that. So I know resilience is a big theme in the book.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Are we less resilient, do you think, than we used to be?
Yeah, definitely. Life is so much more, is relatively easier than it ever has been in our species history. With most people having access to clean water and feeling safe when they walk up their house and being able to marry who they want. And, if you're gay, you're not going to be put in prison and killed. I'm saying like that's kind of was reality and still is in some places. I'm just saying, so on a relative terms, we have it easier than we've ever had. And we do not have the musculature inside us to deal with failures. In fact, simple things feel like big things. So if you get an insult or a nasty comment or a little bad review on something, or your boss sends you a critical email, people crumple. And so the way I define resilience is it's the ability to see the little sliver of light right between the door and the frame after you hear the latch click. And so much of what I talk about in the book is simple mental games and models you can use and you can play with to help you see that light. One example, real quick, is the idea of adding a ... yet to any sentence that you begin with I can't, I don't, or I'm not. So if you listen to your own internal self-talk, me, you, everybody says phrases that start with those phrases, that like you say that all, I'm not creative, I'm not a leader, your blood test back comes negative. You're like, I don't take care of myself. You don't get the promotion. You're like, I'm not promotable. You get dumped. You're like, no one likes me. I see what I'm saying. And yet what I want people to do with that self-talk is and I teach this to my kids. They're like, I don't like broccoli. I'm like, no, I don't like broccoli yet. It's not, I'm not a leader. It's like, I'm not a leader yet. I don't know Japanese. I don't know Japanese yet. I'm not creative. I'm not creative yet. I don't take care of myself. I don't take care of myself yet. And the yet is the sliver. The yet is the sliver of light. The yet is it leaves open the idea that you could. And you could. You actually absolutely could. You can do it. You can do it. So why don't you just insert into your own thinking, the talk that you're listening to more than anyone else, the possibility that you might grow? Because if you do that, then that alone actually is a massive mental shift.
Can you talk about failure a little bit? Because there have been a lot of messages lately about failure, and I think that there is an element to it that is valuable, but people have a tendency to sort of say, oh, you should embrace failure. You should, and I get what they're trying to say, but sometimes I think they oversimplify it a little bit, and that yes, failure is definitely a part of life, and that you need to understand failure, you need to accept it, but it's not as easy as it's often made to sound, right?
Yeah. Well, I always used to marvel at like wedding photographers, because I was like, I was at that wedding. I had a camera. How come they have 50 pictures that are way better than mine? Like, I don't understand how that happened. And so I started asking wedding photographers over the years. I was like, well, how do you take so many good pictures? And they're like, oh, it's easy. I take 1,000 pictures. So I have 50 good ones. You took 50 pictures. So you have 2 good ones. You know what I'm saying? Meaning that they're like, so if you take 1,000 pictures divided by a 3-hour wedding, like they're taking a picture every 10 to 15 seconds. That's the difference. And I started thinking about that a little bit more, and I was like, I remember this baseball stats book I had when I was a little kid, and it always had like, the guy who has the most strikeouts is Nolan Ryan. The guy who has the most wins is Cy Young, right? But then if the stats book I had, because, again, pre-internet, it has like every possible stat in a list. So I go through the book and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. The guy with the most walks, Nolan Ryan. The guy with the most losses, Cy Young. So it's like the guy that we champion as the best also has the worst. Like Tom Brady's won the most Super Bowls. He's also lost the most Super Bowls in the last 10 years. Drew Brees has the most complete passes. He also has the most incomplete passes. And this little string of thinking is awesome, because what it leads you to realize is that almost always whatever you define as success, whatever you call success in your world or your life or your business or your whatever, is a complete function of the number of swings you take. It's a complete function of that. How many times you click the shutter button on your camera? That's what gives you 50 good pictures. How many times you throw a ball? That's what gives you that many strikeouts. How many times, do you see what I'm saying? So what people call failure actually is the key indicator of success. It's the T-1000 from Terminator 2. You have to be able to take all those bullets and swim through that failure and navigate those losses in order to get through it. So Tom Brady's real gift, if he has one, and it's not like I'm a big Tom Brady fan, but I'll just say it, is like the fact that he's had so many incomplete passes, the fact that he's had so many Super Bowl losses, and he's kept going. So you see, failure is actually directly correlated with success. And if you can view it that way, then actually you don't just embrace failure. Like, well, that's the only way to learn. Like, unless I take the most popular photo blog in the world is called Humans of New York. And Brandon Stanton, who runs it, I interviewed him on my podcast. He has, 50 million people follow Humans of New York. I'm sure most people listening have heard of it. But when you talk to him about it, it's like similarly, he's like, I just walked around New York all day. Just think about that. Like morning till night, all day, taking pictures. And like, maybe I'd have one good one. You see what I'm saying? So he had 999 failures each day. And I think about it the same as dating too, right? Like after my divorce, like I probably went on 100 dates till I met Leslie. 100, like the amount, you know how many times I texted someone and they never texted me back? Or I made out with someone and I was like, this is going somewhere, and I never heard from them again. Or someone was really into me and I wasn't, like, that sucks 100 times. But in order to fail at that many relationships, because that's what they are or were as relationships, then I finally met the person of my dreams. And so failure is an ingredient in success. It is correlated with success. It is part of success. There's no success without it. So you actually need to just plow into it and be able to take it and recognize it as a positive thing.
Yeah. And you need to remind yourself that the most successful people in the world are people who have experienced failure. Nobody has
the most.
Nobody has this perfect track record. Nobody has this sort of, even though that's the way we perceive it sometimes, because we forget about their failures. They don't, but we do.
Exactly. Like Stephen King has a lot of books that didn't sell. The Beatles have a lot of songs that no one knows or no one likes. Like even just listening to it, some of their albums, you're like, well, no one's heard of this song. It's not popular. It sucks. And yet that was like printed on one of their albums. Just saying, like, we all have that, and the people that have the most of it win.
Something that I heard you talking about or read you talking about recently really struck a chord with me, and that is that there's a tendency for people when bad things happen, major things in their life, like a divorce, like losing their job, that sort of thing. It's part of what makes it so jarring is that it feels like a finish line, that their life is over, and they forget that there's all this sort of runway in front of them, and that there are all kinds of possibilities that still exist. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was very illuminating.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got fired from my first job at Procter & Gamble. Well, really, I quit just before I was going to get fired. And I then thought my life was over. I thought I could never get a job again. In fact, they're going to call these people and they're going to say, well, he sucked at this job. So I had no reference and I had no job longer than 8 months on my resume. So I was like, that's not going to look good. I was like, therefore, I'm going to be selling refurbished VCRs at trade shows in Cleveland, in 50 years. I'll never get another job again. And I guess, fortunately, there's been research on this. It's done by Daniel Gilbert, a Harvard psychologist. Together with a team of researchers, they studied 19,000 people, and they asked everybody across all genders, across all religions, across all backgrounds, across all age groups. That's important. 2 questions. Number 1, how have the last 10 years of your life been? And how do you think the next 10 years of your life are going to be? Everyone said the last 10 years were tumultuous. I was married to Andy, and then I divorced him, and I met Dave. And we moved from San Francisco to New York, and I got fired from that job, and now I moved here, and then I got this job. And then when people are asked the same second question every time, no matter if they're 20 or 70 or 50 years old or whatever, what do you think the next 10 years are going to be like? Everyone says the same thing. Oh, well, I don't think much will change. I'll probably still be in New York. I'm sure I'll still be married to Dave. And instead of vice president, I'm senior vice president. Like, our ability to picture the future sucks as a whole, no matter how old you are. You always think the last 10 years of your life were wild, and you think the next 10 years are going to be smooth sailing. Recognize that you have the inability you do not have the ability to see the future, and you hilariously think that you do. So that means that when you are cruising, you think you might stay up there forever. And when you lose a job or lose a relationship, you think you're never going to get another one. You think you're never going to meet someone else. And that's just human nature. There's research behind it to show that you're wrong. And we all think the ending now is the ending forever. It's called the end of history illusion, for those that want to look up the research study.
Yeah. Last question, Neil, and I'm so grateful for your time and everything you've shared. What do you think is next for you? Where do you take this next? Because you've explored so much and learned so much and shared so much. What's the next frontier for you, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I just hope that I can look back on my life and think I think the danger for me is over-investing in the visible parts of my life and under-investing in the invisible parts. I mean, everybody's got visible and invisible, but for me, invisible parts, again, that nobody sees are what's my relationship like with my wife? What's my relationship like with my kids? What's the relationship like with my mom and my dad and my sister and my old friends who I do nothing for them and they do nothing for me, but we love each other. Do you know what I'm saying? The non-transactional, like deep old relationships that make a life. And you mentioned I have to go, and the reason I have to go is because I have promised that I'd be with my kids, and so I have to make sure that I've continued to overvalue the invisible, because the visible stuff can be seductive, but that is a red herring. It is extrinsic motivating, and you can't go through life only valuing the stuff that can be measured. Otherwise, you will miss a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, it's a great point. I plan to live a very long life, and my wife and I were talking recently about how, when I'm 90 or 95, all the stuff that other people are sort of valuing in me today through my work or other things like that, none of that's going to matter, right? It's going to be my relationship with the closest, smallest circle of people in my life that's going to matter when I'm 95, and all the other stuff I've done, even what I'm doing today, is going to be long forgotten, so that's what really matters, I think.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right.
Neil, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It is a real thrill to speak with you. There's so many lessons we didn't even get into that are part of your story that you share with others. I encourage people to read all of your work. The latest book, You Are Awesome. So thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Mark. Thank you for this great art that you're making, and thank you for having me on the show.
There is so much that I learned from this conversation with Neil Pasricha. I love what he said about the perspective we should gain from realizing just how incredibly short life is, about holding yourself to a standard that you will be proud of when you look back on your life, and about forcing yourself to follow through on things, as he did with his blog. So once again, thank you to Neil Pasricha for joining us on Digging Deep. If you enjoyed this episode, please review it and share it with others. That will help us produce more great episodes. And if you want to keep digging deep into topics and lessons like this, if you want to see the show notes, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter, or read my daily blog, you can do all of that at letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. Thank you for listening.